Outright Action International, we were founded in 1990 as the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, which means we work in countries to promote rights for LGBTIQ people, and we work internationally at the level of the United Nations to do the same. I think in terms of documenting human rights violations, it's sort of a staple of the work that we do, because if you don't have the evidence, governments are just going to say that there is no discrimination of lesbian and bisexual women in Singapore. And so in order to counter that, in order to prove that yes, there is actually quite widespread discrimination, documentation is key. And so we collect documentation on human rights violations in a few different ways. I mean, oftentimes we work with groups and train them on how to do their own documentation in relation to like what kind of questions that they should ask when they interview people, but also in terms of providing support for those who do the interviews. Being the one who's interviewing people who have experienced horrible abuse at the hands of perpetrators is incredibly difficult for the person also doing the interview. So we have constructed ways of how you can support the interviewers as well, suffering secondhand trauma from just interviewing, dozens of people talking about the horrible life events that they may not have talked about with anyone prior to these interviews. Let me start by saying that the United Nations look at every single country in what is called a universal periodic review. It's like every country comes up and is being reviewed for its human rights record. And the same also goes, every country has signed up to a number of what is called treaties, which is, it's basically agreements between countries that they're going to live up to a certain standard. It can be around eliminating racism, it can be about creating equality between men and women. It can be in a lot of different things. And of course, every country wants to make themselves sound as good as possible. So, a government will say, well, we don't really have much of a problem here in country X. We live up to everything we've said, and really, we don't violate any human rights, more or less. And then they will, moderate it by giving a few examples. But people who live in that country and civil society organizations in that country, they will have a much longer list of how their country does not live up to what they've said they're going to do. And that's what goes into a shadow report. It's called a shadow report because it shadows what the government says. The government will put in their official report, and then civil society organizations will write their reports, which obviously are going to be, in most cases, a lot more true to what is actually happening in that country. The shadow reports will bring out the things that the governments don't necessarily want to talk about. I mean, we've gathered data on human rights violations and abuses throughout the whole existence of the organization for over 25 years. So we have reports that are country specific, on Iran, on Indonesia, on a lot of other countries where we've done work. And we have reports that are regional. We have a report on the situation for lesbian and bisexual women in 5 Asian countries. And so we have a lot of data, but most of it is qualitative. So it describes the realities, it describes the violations and abuses that people suffer. There isn't as much quantitative data. I mean, governments typically don't ask specifically around sexual orientation or gender identity in any surveys that they do. And of course, for organizations, it's hard to access the LGBTIQ population, especially in countries where people are, they're not able to be out, or it's illegal to in any way be associated with LGBTIQ. So there is a lot of qualitative data in terms of describing what the situation is like in a lot of different countries. We're about to launch a project to aggregate data, so definitely to be able to collect more data could definitely be of great use. I'm Sjodin at Outright Action International, and please check out Hack4Equality.com.